In a world full of distractions, there is one big question on every dog owner's lips.
How do I become more than just the person holding the other end of the leash?
We all get dogs with a dream in mind, a vision of the future. And if right now your everyday reality isn't quite that picture you had in mind, you are in the right place.
It really doesn't have to be this way.
You absolutely can and will be more to your dog than just the person who gets in between them and the world.
The key is you need to be more sexy.
More sexy than the neighbourhood cat.
More sexy than the jogger in the park.
More sexy than that half-eaten hamburger they just found on the floor.
And yes, even more sexy than the dog across the road.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Lauren.
Together we're Absolute Dogs.
And you're listening to the Sexier Than a Squirrel podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Sexier Than a Squirrel podcast, the podcast that teaches you how to overcome your dog training struggles and dog owning struggles through games. And we've got permission today that we can talk about Christmas.
We're allowed to talk Christmas. Both Tom and I love Christmas.
It's starting today.
We could sing, we could dance, we could do jingle bells. You know what? We absolutely love an event. We love the celebrations. We love the festive cheer. We love everyone getting together. There's so many positive things about the love. Yeah, that too. We particularly love food and good cheer. And cheers and everything else. And so we do enjoy Christmas. However, Christmas does come with its complications, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we thought would be fun is to effectively do this kind of Christmas prep episode of the podcast where we do a kind of tips tennis where we each do a tip and then we kind of bat it back to the next person, and we think about actually, you know, what things should we be putting in place now, what things should we be considering towards the day and on the day, or days in some cases, and how is this going to be the most stress-free Christmas that you could ever wish for.
Let's be honest, it does become a stressful Christmas, or let's say in absolute game changer words, a stretchful Christmas, when you maybe either are separated from your dog, or whether you have to really you have an incident or something that goes wrong, or something that's kind of upsetting, or something that maybe, I don't know, let's say the dog manages to steal the mince pies. Those situations can be very stretchful. Yeah. And they can be stretchful because actually you were hoping to have a really relaxing Christmas time. So I think it's managing those expectations and planning and prepping before we even get to the event so that we're in the best position. I think there's that great Henry Ford quote that I always forget, and it's something like fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So this is your prep pre-Christmas.
Yeah, so I'm going to serve up.
I thought you were going to sing. Are you going to sing?
Tip, no.
Oh, Tom.
And the first tip that we've got for you is, before Christmas even arrives, let's get our dogs used to actually, just because we're present in the house doesn't mean they have access to us. Now, why is this important? Well, because there are going to be some events, there are going to be some times, there are going to be some situations, there are going to be certain people potentially that are part of your Christmas celebrations where actually your dog would benefit from not necessarily being in their presence and kind of exposed to them and their antics, and maybe your dog won't make the best choices in that situation. That's the first reason why we build this. The second reason is that actually Christmas is just generally, whether it's through excitement or various novel events that happen, it can be very bucket filling for our dogs. And so what we like to do is we like to give our dogs breaks throughout the day where they can just empty their bucket, and that's even if they're really experienced dogs. We still are very, very kind to our dogs as owners, and we give them the opportunity to empty their buckets. Now, how do we teach presence doesn't mean access? Well, it quite simply starts with, let's make it that our dogs don't have access to us, maybe behind a baby gate or in a puppy pen. Let's give them something tasty like a lick mat, or like a Kong or a chew or something like that. And let's leave them to enjoy that experience, and then let's let them out and give them access again in line with where they're at and what they can cope with.
And that leads really nicely on to actually another game that we should really, really top up, and that is boundary games. And I remember really well a few years back with a young Blink who really struggled when there were Christmas celebrations and actually what to do with all that paper and all that fun. And actually boundaries really became the saviour because they allowed her to still be in our presence, and at the same time they gave her a job. Now, that topping up was happening months and months and months before Christmas, and actually has probably been topped up ever since. Now I realise the power of boundary games, and I think that everybody out there should have boundary games. Boundary games, for those of you that don't know, boundary games is basically, effectively, it's a form of target training. So you pop your dog onto their boundary or onto their bed or onto their pillow or whatever it is that is their space. My preference would be something raised or cozy. It could be a bed with sides, or it could be a raised bed, or it could be one of those sort of comfy, squishy beds, something they can get in or on. And then we put value into them being there and staying there and being put on that bed on cue. And actually then when we have a situation like Christmas, or I should say maybe a celebration like Christmas, that's a much better way of putting it, then actually the boundary becomes your friend because your dog has a target station to go to. So there's my tip: build boundary games, grow boundary games, and have them ready for Christmas. Maybe even use Christmas as a bit of a sort of proofing test time for them before you say that actually they might need to rest again, because it can be quite exhausting, like you've already said, Tom.
Yeah. So next tip is, prior to Christmas arriving, we want you to decide what you are going to do and what you are not going to do with your dog. Now, the reason being that Christmas, family members, often you can feel a little bit of peer pressure to get your dog to join in with things. So, for example, like I'm from a big dog family. All of my family have dogs or animals of some kind, and so right from being very, very young, my family will kind of descend on my house, and they'd be bringing their cats, they'd be bringing their dogs, it turned into a zoo effectively. So right before that event, though, what you need to think about is, do you think your dog should maybe go on the Christmas morning walk with the other dogs that might be in your life on that day? Do you think your dog maybe should be part of the action and, around the dinner table? Or do you think their skills are not quite there for that? The reason why you need to decide beforehand is because on the day when, there's probably some level of food and drink involved.
Festive cheer.
And your family are like, no, come on, bring them on the walk. It'll be fine. You know what? My dog will give your dog confidence. They're not going to be at all worried or react to things. It'll be fine. Let's see what happens. You're going to feel like, maybe I should.
And let's be honest, in those moments, we will make a very quick decision. I remember a vet friend of ours who made a quick decision like that when she was out not that long ago, made that quick decision and then spent the next 2 weeks regretting it when it went horribly wrong. Yeah. And she kind of got what she really expected. But in the heat of the moment and the fun of the moment and the festive cheer of the moment, plus maybe the odd tipple, actually suddenly you really
don't make great choices in the moment. So make those choices beforehand, and then when, I don't know, your brother, your cousin, your niece, your nephew turns to you and says, oh, come on, bring them along, and you can easily turn to them and say, you know what, they're not going to enjoy that experience.
And when you've got those lines rehearsed, they do roll off the tongue and they feel very easy to say, don't they, Tom? And then actually you can congratulate yourself later. Also, let's acknowledge that and say that actually Christmas Day walks are possibly the busiest walk you'll ever go on as well. It's kind of like Piccadilly Circus. It literally is busy.
The challenges with Christmas Day walks and walks just around Christmas generally, and like New Year's Day in the UK is exactly the same. It's like you go on a dog walk on New Year's Day, and the thing is that often there are a lot of dogs out that don't really actually get trained or exposed to the outside world the rest of the year, so they're often like the naughtiest dogs are out on those days, and you're putting yourself in that situation.
And they've just gone out for that 4-hour hike that day, haven't they? It's the only time with their owner after they've had food and drink, so it's not always the best combo.
It's not a good recipe, not a good cocktail. So the key is, guys, like, decide beforehand what activities are you going to stretch yourself and actually say, you know what, I am going to have my dog as part of that, and I've got these tools, tricks and games up my sleeve to work with it. And what actually am I going to say, you know what, my dog's not ready for that. They're not going to enjoy that experience, so that you are ready to respond and react to family members that might be encouraging you otherwise.
Okay, so next one that kind of leads very nicely on from Tom's tip is actually let's ditch the routine.
Yeah.
Now, we want you to do that all the time. And at the same time, if you haven't already, and if you are maybe doing it partially, let's do it all out, because ditching the routine pre-Christmas actually allows you to do whatever you want to do throughout Christmas. Because actually, when we ditch the routine, for example, now we're both out. This isn't normal for our dogs that we're both out at this time, but actually that was the best time for us to get together and chat through some prep for you guys for Christmas and a podcast. Our dogs will work with that. Sometimes we take them in the car, sometimes we don't take them in the car, sometimes we take them in the car and we don't go for a walk, sometimes we take them in the car and we do go for a walk. Some mornings we go for a walk, some evenings we go for a walk, some middays we go for a walk, and we don't do the same each and every time. We really do ditch the routine, and it has like lifelong benefits, right, Tom? For health, for welfare, for good sort of cognitive brain development. It's the right space to live in. Ditch the routine.
Absolutely. So next tip I'm going to go for, actually this is some homework for you all you humans listening, and that is that how about we get really prepared for that day by considering maybe 10 different passive calming activities that our dogs could do. Like, for example, we might have a long-lasting chew. Maybe it's a pizzle. Maybe I'm going to fill a Kong. Maybe I'm going to get my canine calm mats all ready and smear on the wet food and freeze them. I want to think about 10 different kind of long-lasting chews and licking strategies that are going to promote calmness and occupy my dogs. And let's get them all prepared ahead of the day. Let's have them in the freezer ready to go, so that you're not kind of being reactive to the situation. You're thinking, I've got those. These I can rely on.
And you don't feel bad. You feel good. Yeah. You feel excited.
You're in control.
You are rocking it. You're killing it.
And you can do that today in anticipation of Christmas Day. And you know what? Just maybe have like a dedicated drawer of your freezer full of these effectively like safety net calm tools for your dog.
Funny story here on the freezer. So Tom knows, and obviously we feed some raw, some kibble. Let's not get into the food debate. I had someone come over here the other day to bring some food over, and they basically had freezer envy. They were like, "Oh my god, your freezer is with dog." And it was like proper freezer envy, because we do, right, Tom? We feel we do really prep, and we're very ahead. And on the note of food, I think the next tip has to be vigilant on what your dog should not be near around Christmas, because it only takes that slip of the hand, or that dog who just counter surfs at the wrong time. So think about the things that your dog should not be having: mince pies, raisins, chocolate, lots of different things that your dogs need to be. You need to be aware of all the stuff around Christmas.
Absolutely. And think about this, guys. Like I
Tom
often
sees it as a vet.
I often have conversations with owners where they know that their dog's, for example, a counter surfer. They know that they're not going to be able to have their full attention on their dog, and they've not implemented the gator community and presence doesn't mean access that we've just advised. And yet then what they do is they bring Raisins into the picture, and I'm like, come on, if you know that your dog that your dog's going to do this and that your full attention's not going to be there, the easy solution, like, pick your battles. Fair enough if you don't want to train. How about let's have a raisin-free house?
And literally, I mean, this one's such a funny one for me, because on a serious note, this did happen to me about 12 years ago, probably a little bit longer. No, let me think. 12 years ago. And I had a little dog on the front seat of my vehicle in a crate strapped in. So it was an airline crate strapped in on a van. So it was on a van, and it was very, very safe, and it was all correct. And I had been eating grapes, and they had been on my lap. So I'd been eating grapes, and I'd been listening to. I think I was doing some work and waiting at the station. Anyway, I went out to collect my friend, and I left the grapes on my seat, the crate done up, and that dog managed to claw those grapes into that vehicle, and I do not into that crate, and I do not know to this day how that happened, but I know the sheer panic that hit me when I realized that whole pack of grapes had gone, and they would be, I mean, I saw the shredded mess that was all kind of there, and the dog had managed to get them, and I couldn't understand it. I really couldn't understand it, and yet that reality was there. So just like you said, and this was like 12 years ago, 10 years ago, and just like you said, Tom, it's that actually maybe these two don't mix. And actually, let's just be kind to ourselves and not give ourselves a tough Christmas, whether it's that lovely Christmas pud that you've got ready and it's been home baked and it's sat on the side, or whether it is that Christmas cake, or whether it's the mince pies, or whether it's any of the other chocolate fancies that you've got prepared. And we are more than willing to share this delight with you. We absolutely love Christmas food. Just let's be thoughtful about dogs and the foods around Christmas.
Absolutely. And so really, I guess the tip there is pick your battles and be aware of where your dog's skills are right now, and that, you know, it's a time for you to relax and enjoy yourself.
And it's not just you, right? It's also all your family members, because they're all there, so they all have a level of responsibility. And if they're not able to be responsible, as in Eliza is 8, and so you're kind of aware that sometimes accidents might happen, cupboards might be left open, actually, like, do we want to pick that battle?
Yeah, I remember having this conversation with my mum, like it must have been about 6-7 years ago, and she always has like these bowls of like chocolates around the house around Christmas, and they'll be like on the coffee table, and they'll be on the sideboard,
amazing.
and they'll just be everywhere. And I saw her repeatedly have the same battle with her dog, where effectively the dog would think it would be funny to just pick one out and carry it around in his mouth, the chocolate. And to be honest, he wasn't interested in eating them. He just saw the reaction that it got from my mum when he did this, and this conflict went on, and I had to say, I was like, how about we put the chocolates like on a higher surface where we can't reach them? And my mum was like, well, because that's not what we do at Christmas. And I'm like, well, how about we do that at Christmas? And she's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I've been like battling this and getting stressed about this for weeks, and actually a very simple solution is for me to be flexible and just pop them a little bit higher.
And we're supposed to be the bigger brain in this relationship, and yet so many times
we get into these
we fall
habits.
into the habit that we kind of go, oh, this is how we do it, and it's so normal, it's so obvious, it's completely normal, and it's just acknowledging it.
One of the biggest, like, most common statements that I'll like hear in a behavior consult is, but oh my gosh, I feel so stupid. Why didn't I think of that? It's so simple.
Or I would have thought about that
normal.
for someone else. Like so many of the pro dog trainers, they'll say like, oh, I'd have thought about that for someone else, because most of the pro dogs trainers still train themselves. I mean, that's important, guys. You're still training yourself, whether that's in any fashion. But with the pro dog trainers, they'll often say, oh, I know that. I've done that. I've told other people to do that. I'm so embarrassed. I didn't think about that in this moment.
But the reality is, when you're there day in, day out doing the daily firefighting and reacting because you've set up this battle situation, and so you know what, you've got to follow it through. Well, you don't think about these things. It's taking a step back from the situation, thinking, hold on a second, do I need this difficulty in my life? I think especially at Christmas, where all of a sudden the entire environment changes, you know, there's baubles everywhere and tinsel everywhere and chocolates everywhere. We've probably got to think smart about, well, how can I make this time enjoyable for my dog and my relationship with my dog? And that might mean being flexible in the way that we implement Christmas.
And I think that is probably an amazing tip in itself, right? Be flexible about how you're implementing Christmas. Okay, I'm going to do one last tip, and my tip is going to be on actually walking your dog in general over Christmas, and actually how you could ditch the walk. So for me, for example, ditching the walk might mean that I have lots of other strategies throughout the days, like you said, with the different styles of feeding, and also the fact that some days we might do what we would call triple F. That's our fitness and foundation program. So we might do things like that in the house. We might do different things, and that would be because often around the Christmas period you might see a high volume of, like Tom said, walkers that aren't necessarily normally out there, right, Tom?
They're probably in a similar situation to you, where they're like, oh yeah, I'll come along with my dog, and they're thinking my dog's going to bark and lunge at everything, but you know what, it's Christmas, we've got to get out there.
And it's the expectation as well, because if they're anything like my mum, or potentially even your mum, Tom, my mum would be saying things like, oh, bring her along, it's a shame not to bring her, it's a shame not to bring her, let her come. I've wrapped tinsel around
his collar, he's got to show the village.
Let them come. Like, shame, you can't leave him out, that's such a shame, don't be doing that. So they're gonna be having this pressure as well. So actually having that ditch the walk strategy in there, knowing that you've done your triple F workout in the morning, or knowing that you've done your lunchtime food Kong, or knowing that you've done your evening calm mat, and you've done maybe some scatter feeding in the garden, or you've done some enrichment in the household, whatever it might be, because we ditch the bowl here at Absolute Dogs, and because we ditch the routine, ditching the walk when we need to is something that we can replace it with other forms of exercise. So please don't misconstrue this with our dogs don't ever get to walk. They absolutely do, appropriately. And at the same time, what we don't want to do is throw them into the fire when actually that might not be the best time to walk them with the hundreds of people that decide to flock to where we live on Dartmoor, and suddenly you get like literally it just turns into a whole new world, right? It's probably similar to the beach. They just literally have such an influx of people, it might not be appropriate for each and every dog.
Absolutely. So guys, these are the tips that leading up to the day you can already implement. You can implement all the things that we just talked about prior to Christmas arriving. So what we want you to do is we want you to move to a world of being proactive rather than reactive. We know that it's a busy time of year, and so it tends to be a time where we all slip into reaction as there's so much to do and family to organize and whatever else. But the cool thing is that if you do this now, even, you know, before you start your day, you're listening to this podcast right now, before you do your next thing, let's implement these strategies. Well, you're already in a much better place.
Even if you just do one thing, I think I'm a huge believer in even if you just do one thing. So one thing I might do is I love the idea that my dogs get some like turkey stuffing for their Kongs. It just makes me their calm mat is lathered with their calm supplement and their mixed meat. So actually they have that prepped. It makes me feel good. So for me, making sure I've got my whether it's the calm supplement in stock or whether it's the supply of meat that I'm going to use to put with it, whatever it is, I want to make sure I've got those. So that might be the one thing I do. Go and order that. Whatever it might be for you.
Do one thing, and if you do all of them, then brilliant, but also just do one thing. So with that, guys, that was this episode of the Sexier Than a Squirrel podcast. We will see you next week. Do your one thing, and remember, stay sexy. Hey, before you go, have you taken part in the worldwide Sexier Than a Squirrel challenge?
It's a 25-day online video program, huge energy, amazing community, and over 6,000 people are already taking part.
The only question is, you know where you are today. Where do you want to be 25 days from now? Head to absolutedogs.me/sexy.